Bibliophiles of the internet, today I'm here to share my July wrap-up. Let's just get right into it, starting with the first book I started in June but actually finished in July to close out Tome Topple Round 18, and that was none other than The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. I was very kindly granted access to the sensational audiobook courtesy of PRH Audio, which was read by Joel de la Fuente. This is a queer, epic fantasy that, when boiled down to its most essential parts, is about two warriors who are shepherding an ancient god across a deeply broken land in hopes of freeing the kingdom from generations of suffering under tyrannical despots. These two characters, Kima and June, embark on an unforgettable 5-day pilgrimage as they search for a way to end the Moon Throne once and for all. Content warnings for graphic death and violence, some ableist language, animal death, references to war PTSD, some descriptions of torture, mentions of cannibalism and suicide, and some sexual content. This was far and away the book you all wanted me to read the most for Tome Topple. No other book in that poll was even remotely close. The Spear Cuts Through Water had double the amount of votes as the next closest book, and I have to say, you were all absolutely correct about this. This book is everything everyone says it is, and it's also so much more. It is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of story, a story that both redefines and reaffirms what storytelling can be, and it is nothing short of a masterpiece. It takes a master of the craft to pull off a story structured like this and told like this. It is so ambitious, and it makes my brain hurt just thinking about all these moving parts, but Jimenez is masterful in his execution, and as is the mark of a true master, he makes it feel so natural and so seamless. As many people have pointed out before, this story emulates the feeling, the method, the ritual of oral storytelling, which is part of what makes it so incredibly rich. Even though you can identify the main characters in the story, there is a feeling and a joining of collective voices. There are layers of storytelling happening all at the same time. Not only are you as the reader aware that the bigger picture story is being told to another character in the story, but there are moments when minor characters or characters who are on the periphery of the story interject their voices and perspectives on what's happening in a scene. Almost like a Greek chorus, but also not. So there's an expansiveness to the storytelling that's both incredibly effective and also immersive, because it makes you aware as the audience that your witnessing of the story is, in turn, adding something to the narrative. It is truly astonishing what Simon Jimenez has accomplished here just in terms of structure and technique, and the audiobook for this story is performed to perfection as well. The way Joel de la Fuente uses his voice to differentiate between all these different moving parts is so incredibly impressive. But putting all that aside for the moment, on its own, this is an unforgettable quest fantasy epic that has absolutely everything to offer. It has mythology, it has action, it's adventurous, there's queer romance, and even though it's so intricately told and complex, when boiled down to its simplest parts, it has a resounding message about freeing yourself from the past, freeing yourself from the limitations of what has always been or what's come before, and being brave enough to fight for a new future, even if that future is characterized by uncertainty. And it's also exploring that struggle between destiny and free will, how cyclical violence is its own kind of predetermined destiny, and how we can understand and reclaim the power of our agency and choice to imagine healthier, more sustainable cycles, even if they might still be imperfect. Much like with The Vanished Birds, there's just no way I'm gonna get even close to doing this book justice, and I've accepted that. I am just adding my voice to the effusive chorus of folks who have had the immense privilege of experiencing this story and knowing on a molecular level how special it truly is. To even assign this book a star rating does not convey my feelings strong enough, but it was a very clear 5 stars. After finishing that, I knew I had to pivot to something a little bit more lighthearted, so I turned to a dependable favorite author of mine and finally picked up Otherworldly by F.T. Lukens. The finished copy I read from was kindly gifted to me by Simon Teen, and the book came out earlier this year on April 2nd. This is a zany, queer, paranormal romance about a non-binary teenager named Ellery who absolutely does not believe in the supernatural, but they also can't quite explain why their small town has been trapped in an endless winter for 5 years straight. Knox is a familiar from the other world who can only cross into the human world if he has a contract with a human, and when the Crossroad demons come to collect him after his latest contract is over, he panics and runs right into Ellery, who saves his life. So then Ellery and Knox decide to help each other out and make a contract. Knox will help Ellery secure an audience with the Queen of the Otherworld in order to break the curse on this town, and Ellery will help Knox experience all the best parts of human life. Content warnings for explorations of familial trauma and religious trauma, and some descriptions of blood, graphic injury, and violence. Unsurprisingly, I love this. I had such a great time with it. FT Lukens never fails to bring so much fun and joy into everything they write, and even though this book does go to some darker places compared to their other books, that hope, that ability to revel in the ridiculousness and the ridiculous beauty of life is still very much at the forefront. And what I especially love about this book is that while there is a really fun and sweet queer romance between Ellery and Knox, it's also just such a beautiful celebration of platonic queer love. That beautiful, resilient kind of queer love that exists within communities and found family and friends. And for me, I think that's what really makes the story work. On the one hand, it's very much about encountering supernatural creatures, magical contracts, trying to traverse through the other world, and all the wacky things these human characters have to do and discover to make that happen. But because of Knox, it's also about stepping back and learning how to fall in love with your own life. I feel like that's what the story is really trying to explore, how we tend to define our lives and ourselves by the imperfections, but how being able to slow down and appreciate the people we love and who love us, and the good things we built for ourselves and fought for, is very much a skill worth learning and a muscle worth building. It takes consciousness, it takes effort, it takes practice. So those were the parts of the story I love the most, when Knox's outside perspective on humankind allows Ellery to realize that there are good things and good people in their life, and that there's so much in this world and this life to live for and to fight for, even when we can't recognize those things. And I know it sounds like I'm making this romanticized, grandiose statement about life, but the story really understands that sometimes the things worth living for are your friends and your loved ones, and sometimes it's a really good snack or a show you love to watch, and those can all carry the same importance and have their own place. Overall, this was really fun. Everything I could possibly hope for from a supernatural urban fantasy story from FT Lukens. I do wish the romance had a little bit of a slower burn. I think the intensity of the characters' feelings kick in a little bit early for me, and I also felt there was some more room to explore Ellery's family dynamic, but I still had a really great time with this and would absolutely recommend it alongside all of FT's other books. I gave it a very strong 4 stars. After that, I picked up my arc of The Loudest Silence by Sydney Langford. I actually picked this up from ALA, and it recently came out on July 30th from Holiday House. This is written by a queer and deaf hard of hearing author. It's a platonic queer love story between 2 disabled queer teenagers. Casey is a very accomplished vocalist who's always dreamt of singing professionally, but she is now having to navigate sudden and permanent hearing loss, and right before her family moves across the country. Hayden is a mixed-race Cuban-American athlete whose family has a long legacy of playing soccer. His own brother was just signed to a professional team, and his teammates have also voted him to be team captain. But he doesn't want to play soccer. He wants to be a singer and write music. So Hayden and Casey become unlikely friends, and after a rocky start to their friendship, they realize that they've not only bonded over their shared love of music, but if they can overcome their fears, they might be able to make music together at an upcoming talent show. It's also worth noting that Hayden has generalized anxiety disorder and he's aro ace. Casey is deaf hard of hearing, and she's also bisexual. Content warnings for experienced ableism, including medical ableism, instances of bullying and cyberbullying, and some depictions of anxiety and panic attacks. Listen, this is basically a YA tribute to High School Musical. It's not a retelling, it's not a carbon copy of that plotline in any sense, but if you like the general vibes of an athlete with a secret burning desire to break into musical theater, finding the perfect musical partner to do so, then you'll most likely enjoy this. I deeply appreciate the way this story celebrates this really lovely queer platonic relationship between 2 queer disabled teens. Not only do we not get to see that kind of representation every day, but it's also rare for a YA story to resist compulsory romanticism and make space for 2 queer teens to have an intimate, trusting relationship that doesn't end in romance. That's incredibly valuable to have in the YA space. Overall, I think the story has a lot of great things things to say about being yourself, learning how to trust yourself, learning how to differentiate between the boxes other people put you in and the boxes you've put yourself in, and how to make space for yourself beyond those limitations. It's also one of those YA stories featuring a big, boisterous friend group, so there's a lot of fun banter, great slice of life moments throughout the school year, and lots of interesting side characters and energy for the main characters to bounce off of. All of that said, I did want a bit more from the story overall. It felt a bit disjointed. It took a little too long for the main plotline to take shape. Many things that we're told are important don't always feel important. For example, this prevalence of soccer in Hayden's family, even though there's hardly any focus on him playing the game or having those conversations with his family or his teammates. The characters also felt a little bit soapboxy at times. It's not that I don't see the value in the conversations they were trying to have as much as I felt like those discussions could have been better explored in much more effective ways. And there's a lot of aspects of representation in this story that I cannot specifically speak to, but I will say that the Spanglish parts of the dialogue, while not technically incorrect or overtly wrong in any sort of way, just felt very awkward and forced. Even with that in mind, I did still enjoy this. It was fun to read, and I think it has a lot to offer a lot of different kinds of readers, but it just didn't blow me away, and I think the characterization could have been stronger in more ways than one. But this was still solid, and I gave it 3.5 stars. On a very different note, after that I read another one of my ALA pickups, and that was The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. This is a blend of psychological thriller and horror, pitched as Crying in H Mart meets My Sister the Serial Killer. This is a twisted family saga culminating in the making of a female serial killer from a Korean-American perspective. Our main character is Jiwon, whose family is in shambles. Her father not only has an affair with another woman, but leaves the family in order to be with her. Jiwon's mother is distraught until she suddenly announces that she's also dating someone new. This man, George, is a much older white man who's extremely dangerous, secretive, and predatory. He's racist, he's disgusting, he makes Jiwon and her younger sister feel very uncomfortable, but despite their gut feeling that this guy is bad news, he is slowly but surely ingratiating himself more and more into their lives. On top of that, Jiwon is really struggling with her college classes, but she doesn't want anyone to know about it, so all of that stress builds and builds until she starts having strange dreams and visions that she can't quite explain, while also fighting a losing battle against the urge to kill people and hurt people as a means to quell her rage. Content warnings for references to infidelity, some descriptions of starvation and child death, experienced racism, physical and verbal sexual harassment, and racial fetishization, brief references to suicidal thoughts, some descriptions of cannibalism, and descriptions of blood, as well as graphic injury, death, and violence. Just as a note, the story does briefly reference Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who's been known to engage with TERF rhetoric. I don't know what her stance is as of 2024, but I do also want to point out that the mention of her work is used as a way to characterize a side character as a walking red flag. So in a weird way, it's kind of a green flag. This was absolutely wild, but I had a great time reading through it, as strange as that might sound. It's very slow burn. Yes, it's a thriller. Yes, there are gory parts, but the story also recognizes the importance of not only putting in the work to build out this character, but also build out this entire family dynamic. At its heart, this story is really a multi-generational family saga. If we just had this character full of unchecked rage, killing people left and right as a way to deal with her parents' divorce, that would just be sensationalist. But we come to understand the generational and cultural dynamics at play that have contributed to the main character's repression and silence. And that's why I think the eventual release of the main character's rage, while deeply unhealthy, ultimately feels so cathartic, because all her life she's had these examples of women in her family who have had to put their heads down and just endure, and who ultimately are never rewarded for that resilience. I also love the very purposeful use of setting as a way to add tension to the story. Jiwon, her sister, and her mother live together in this teeny tiny apartment where they're forced to be on top of each other. There's no privacy, there's no way to separate themselves from each other. Jiwon not only shares a room with her sister, but they sleep on the same mattress. So it's very closed in, it's very claustrophobic. It feels like the characters are always being watched. The characters are in this environment where they feel trapped and where their options are incredibly limited. And that beautifully reflects the emotional and mental turmoil that Jiwon is experiencing. It's eerie, it's suspenseful, it's uncomfortable, it's disturbing, it's surprisingly emotional and emotionally resonant. The story is very much an exploration of what it means to be put in a position where you're responsible for the well-being, happiness, and longevity of everyone around you. How the world constantly places that burden on the shoulders of women of color especially, and the countless ways they're set up to fail under that pressure and buckle under that weight. I also appreciate how the story builds up Jiwon's fixation on eyes specifically, especially how consuming the eyes of an animal culturally signifies chasing luck or good fortune, and exploring why she might be desperate to secure those things in her life. There were a few details I thought could have been better. I wish the side characters had been further developed, especially the ones outside of Jiwon's family, because that could have added even more layers of tension. And there were also some medical things towards the end that I found to be questionable, if not outright problematic, and that ultimately I don't think the story actually needed. Obviously, I can't be more specific because that is a spoiler, but overall this was a wild ride and a thoroughly impressive debut. I look forward to seeing what Monica Kim has in store next, and I gave this 4 stars. Then I finally picked up my review copy of The Seventh Veil of Salome by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I was kindly gifted an early finished copy by Del Rey, but this one actually recently came out on August 6th. This is historical fiction all about Hollywood glamour and drama set against the backdrop of 1950s Hollywood, where a major film studio is looking to shoot this big budget movie about a little-known Bible character named Salome, whose strength and seductiveness has haunted and inspired countless artistic works. This is a huge, life-changing role that could absolutely make someone's career, but the director is being very picky about who he wants to cast, even though hundreds of actresses are clamoring for the role, until suddenly the director cast an unknown Mexican ingenue named Vera Larios. So the story is about the resentment and controversy surrounding her casting. It's about how she learns to survive in Golden Age Hollywood, where gossip, scandal, and intrigue are king, and the story is also interspersed with scenes from Salome's life in the days leading up to her infamous dance. Content warnings for experienced racism and colorism, including racial slurs and sexually derogatory comments, instances of sexual harassment and abuse, brief mentions of suicide, some references to drug abuse, some discussions of domestic abuse and pregnancy loss, as well as some descriptions of violence and gun violence. Unless you're new here, you should already know just how much I love Silvia Moreno Garcia. I've definitely said this before and I'll happily say it again, but no one else is doing it quite like she is. The range of genres and writing styles that she's not only written within but mastered is simply unmatched. If you're looking for SMG criticism, you will not find it here. This is not the place. This book is once again a major pivot from her last release, and in fact it stands out from pretty much every one of her other books because it is purely historical fiction with no other genre elements from start to finish. So even though she's done historical fiction before, she's never done it quite like this, and I knew she would be able to pull it off purely because I know she understands drama and she understands social and political dynamics in a way that's so precise. This book is a masterclass in depicting Golden Age Hollywood at its absolute height. Silvia is always incredibly well researched when she takes on historical fiction, and this book is no different. She really immerses the reader in the timeline of the story, not only through crafting compelling characters and incorporating really distinctive details, but also by populating the story with real-life Hollywood figures and facts, really painting a picture of what the film industry was like and how it worked in the 1950s. But what really blew me away about this story was its incredible use of plot structure, which is somehow both fairly straightforward at first glance, but also completely unexpected in some ways. What I mean by that is the story is structured in such a way that the reader is following Vera through this linear timeline leading up to shooting the most pivotal scene in the film, but it's broken up by these interludes depicting Salome's story written from Salome's point of view. And more specifically, the Salome portions of the story are written in narrative prose. It's not just a script of what Vera and the other actors are shooting in the film adaptation of Salome's story, which would have been the obvious choice, the easy choice. But what makes it an even more nuanced structural choice is that those interludes aren't just dropped into the story wholesale. The next interlude doesn't just pick up exactly where the last one left off, because it isn't just a simple juxtaposition of character versus actress, but the two pieces are woven together in such a way that they actually inform each other. What Vera is experiencing herself allows allows you to fill in the missing gaps of Salome's story without having to be told the entire thing from start to finish. The two characters' storylines are so closely paralleled emotionally that you're able to infer what one or the other is feeling or going through based on their counterparts' POV sections. Especially because despite the fact that both characters' experiences and journeys are paralleled with each other, that doesn't mean they're copy-pasted from each other. Vera's storyline is not just an interpretation or modern retelling of Salome's life. They just have to navigate similar things. Ultimately, this is really a story about the fairy tale and the theater of female empowerment. How so often we give women the illusion of power, the illusion of choice, but actually strip them of their agency and their personhood in practice. With Salome, she is the daughter of royalty. She's able to pull certain strings in court, but when it comes to her own life and when it comes down to it, she has very little freedom to choose for herself. And same with Vera, who's this up-and-coming actress in the role of a lifetime, starring in the biggest production of the year, and yet everyone but her gets a say in how she's going to conduct herself. So really the story is exploring how these respective characters learn how to toe the line of what's expected of them while still finding ways to claim and exercise their own power from within those confines, even if it means having to make imperfect choices. The only thing I wish was different about the story is that I wish we got to read from even more industry points of view in Vera sections. We kind of start out from the point of view of a scriptwriter, which I thought was really strong, but we rarely get to have that outside look on Vera's journey in quite the same way. We do occasionally get to hear from some other voices, but it mostly boils down to like one antagonistic character who I kind of felt like took up too much space. And especially because Vera's role was so coveted by so many ambitious actresses, I wish we got even more of a sense of these other jaded industry professionals set against her or working against her from the shadows, but because it's mostly just this one actress, it's borderline mustache twirly at times, which is not my preference. But that's a very minor note. It did not lessen my reading experience in any significant way. This was absolutely brilliant. It did not disappoint, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Afterwards, I read my Patreon pick for July, and my patrons felt very strongly about me reading The Emperor and the Endless Palace by Justinian Huang. I actually checked this out from my library and also did a hybrid read with the audiobook, which was gifted to me by Libro.fm and read by Will Dao, Telly Leung, and Dylan J. Locke. This is a queer, epic, romantic fantasy. I wouldn't call it a romance by definition, but it is romantic. The story is set across 3 incredibly distant timelines going back as far as 4 BCE and as recent as present day, as 2 soulmates reconnect across lifetimes. In 4 BCE, an ambitious courtier is called to seduce a young emperor. In 1740 China, an innkeeper agrees to help a mysterious visitor procure a rare medicine, and in present-day Los Angeles, a college student meets a beautiful stranger at a gay circuit party and cannot shake the feeling that this is not the first time they've met. Content warnings for references to execution and forced suicide, mentions of panic attacks, descriptions of seizures, drug use and drug overdose, experienced ableism, death, blood, graphic injury, and graphic violence, some references to grooming, and explicit sexual content. I think this is a really unique and ambitious take on the fated soulmates trope. I do love stories about reincarnated lovers, soulmates finding each other again and again across time, and even though the primary timelines of this story are set in such disparate times and places, somehow the story is still cohesive. Something I think this author does incredibly well is to maintain the reader's attention and investment in each respective timeline by always ending the rotating chapters with a moment of tension. So even when you're diving into another storyline that's completely different in setting and tone with completely different characters, when that other timeline comes back around, you always know exactly where it picks up because that unresolved tension, that question mark, has been lingering in the back of your mind. I also respect the way the story uses queer eroticism, not as a voyeuristic display of gratuitous pleasure that's meant to entertain or titillate the audience, but as an exploration of power dynamics and how the characters use their sensuality and sexuality as a means to both exercise power and experience power. And I think the context of eroticism in this specific story that's centering and exploring Chinese history and mythology is essential to understanding its purpose and its importance, especially when we consider how Asian men specifically have been historically emasculated and desexualized from a global and Western perspective. I am not a queer Asian man, so I can't speak to that more, but it is something I am aware of and I think is worth considering before we flatten that context and favor of labeling this story as spicy or having a high heat level. I think that really does the story a disservice. It was also kind of interesting to be reading this around the same time as The Seventh Veil of Salome because it's attempting to do the exact opposite with its parallel timelines and storylines. By that I mean the timelines do very much mirror each other in terms of what happens, but because the timelines are so far apart, it becomes a guessing game as to how the reoccurring characters and plot points are going to show up, and it becomes a question of whether the characters will react the same way or make different choices. To me, this story is really about exploring the question of what it means to love someone unconditionally, what it means to continue loving someone in perpetuity and committing yourself to meeting them where they are and how they are over and over and over again as many times as it takes. And what does it mean to love someone knowing that love itself is deeply imperfect by definition, and that they are not made infallible simply by the virtue of your love? Those are big questions, and I appreciate the story's ability to parse them out while still providing compelling characters and an entertaining plot. I will say the story does try to overtly connect the timelines through a specific object or plot point, and that felt a bit unnecessary for me and also kind of hokey at times. I don't feel like the story was able to really go anywhere with that idea in the end, and I kind of wish it was just left out. And I do think some of the characterization was borderline stereotypical at some parts, though for the most part I think the story manages to avoid being cliche. So all in all, I was invested, I was intrigued, I was impressed by how the author was able to hold the story together and tie the characters together, and I gave this a solid 4 stars. Now before I close out here, I will say I got about halfway through my arc of When the World Tips Over by Jandy Nelson, which I started in the last few days of July, but I did not finish it, and I still have not finished it completely as of filming this. So unfortunately I can't give my final thoughts on the story, but I will definitely be sharing a review post of some kind on Instagram once I do finish it, so if you follow me there you'll get to see my thoughts, and even if you don't follow me there, I will link that down below once it has been posted. So those are all the books I read in July. I cannot complain, it was another really good reading month. Let me know what you read in July, or if you've read or plan to read any of the books I talked about today, feel free to share your thoughts on them in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself and others, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.